The Olympic Games are celebrated for athletic triumphs and unforgettable moments, but behind the glory lies a darker side. Throughout history, a few tragic accidents and fatal incidents have shocked the world, reminding us that even the pinnacle of sport can carry unexpected danger, turning dreams into nightmares in an instant. Francisco Lazaro's death at the 1912 Stockholm Olympics sounds unreal until you remember early Olympic athletes were basically fearless experiments wrapped in national pride and misplaced confidence. The marathon took place under brutal summer heat, with temperatures climbing high enough to punish even well-prepared bodies. Lazaro, running for Portugal, followed advice common at the time and coated his body with grease, believing it would prevent sunburn and help his muscles perform smoothly. Instead, it quietly sabotaged him. Sweat is the body's cooling system, and the grease blocked it almost completely. As the race dragged on, his internal temperature kept rising while his body had no escape valve. Each step pushed him closer to disaster, even though he looked strong and determined from the outside. Around 30 kilometers in, his body finally gave up. He collapsed on the road, shocking spectators who assumed he was only exhausted, unaware they were watching history unfold in the worst possible way. It was a moment where outdated science, human endurance, and blind optimism collided under the sun, turning a hopeful Olympic dream into a quiet, irreversible tragedy before anyone truly understood what was happening to him that day on that long road ahead. Lazaro was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was already severe and unstoppable. He died from heat stroke and dehydration, becoming the first athlete to lose his life during an Olympic marathon. The incident shocked the sporting world and exposed how little was understood about endurance, hydration, and human limits. At the time, many coaches believed drinking water during a race weakened runners, a belief that now sounds absurd and dangerous. Combined with extreme heat and blocked sweating, this mindset created perfect conditions for disaster. Lazaro did not fail because he lacked strength or courage. If anything, he had too much determination. His body continued running long after it should have stopped, driven by willpower rather than physiology. His death forced officials to confront uncomfortable truths. Slowly, changes followed. Water stations became normal. Medical staff were added, and athlete safety began to matter more than reckless displays of toughness alone. The tragedy quietly reshaped marathon culture, reminding organizers that the human body is not indestructible, and that ignoring biology in favor of bravado can turn sporting ambition into irreversible loss within minutes on the hottest days, especially during grueling endurance events watched by millions worldwide then and now alike everywhere. What makes Lazaro's story especially haunting is how ordinary it must have looked. There was no crash or dramatic accident, just a man slowly overheating from the inside while continuing forward on sheer determination. Spectators cheered, unaware his body temperature was rising to lethal levels. The irony is cruel. Greece, something associated with protection, became the silent villain. Over a century later, his name still appears whenever people discuss extreme endurance, outdated training myths, or the dangerous glorification of suffering in sports. His death reminds athletes that listening to the body is not weakness, but survival. Modern runners cooling themselves with water, electrolytes, and science unknowingly benefit from lessons written in tragedy. Lazaro did not chase fame recklessly. He trusted the knowledge of his era and paid for it. His legacy warns that courage without understanding can be deadly. It stands as a grim reminder that progress in sport has often been paid for with sweat, suffering, and lives lost, shaping safer futures through painful lessons that should never be forgotten by athletes, coaches, or fans around the world, especially when endurance events push human limits beyond reason or respect for biology and safety standards today. Everywhere still learning slowly. It is Rome, 1960, and the Olympic Games are in full swing. The city is buzzing with excitement. Athletes are flexing their muscles, and spectators are ready to cheer their hearts out. Among the hopefuls is Knud Jensen, a Danish cyclist with legs like pistons and a competitive streak that could scare anyone. He is gearing up for the 100-kilometer team time trial, a race that would make even seasoned cyclists sweat just thinking about it. And sweat, well, it turns out, would play a pivotal role in this story. Rome is baking under the scorching summer sun, with temperatures soaring above 40 degrees, and the asphalt radiates heat like a giant frying pan. Poor Knud and his teammates are about to find out what happens when human endurance meets literal fire. The crowd cheers as the cyclists pedal off, helmets glinting, muscles flexing, hearts racing, adrenaline pumping. Early on, everything seems textbook perfect. Synchronized pedaling, team strategies unfolding, and the thrill of Olympic glory in full display. But as the kilometers tick by, Rome's brutal heat starts turning this race into a literal battle of man versus sun. Jensen, ever the determined athlete, pushes on, no water breaks, no shortcuts, just pure willpower. Little does anyone know, the combination of extreme heat, physical exhaustion, and an ambitious human spirit is about to collide in a way no one could have imagined. About halfway through the race, spectators notice something alarming. Knud's riding becomes uneven, his once precise pedaling starting to wobble like a robot running low on batteries. His face is red, sweaty, and tense, not the picture of an Olympic champion anymore, but a man fighting a battle against his own body. Suddenly, tragedy strikes. Knud collapses on his bike. The crowd gasps, medics rush over, and the reality of the situation hits. This is not just exhaustion. In the chaos, he fractures his skull when he hits the road, a critical injury that will prove fatal. Despite immediate medical attention and rushed hospitalization, the brave Danish cyclist dies a few hours later, leaving the sporting world in shock. The cause is officially heat stroke, but whispers circulate about performance-enhancing substances, stimulants like amphetamines and vasodilators that are common at the time. These chemicals likely interfere with the body's natural cooling system, making the heat even more deadly. It is a grim reminder that Olympic glory comes with risks, and sometimes pushing the human body beyond its limits can have catastrophic consequences. Knud Jensen's death is not just a tragic headline, it becomes a wake-up call for the sports world. Suddenly, questions about athlete safety, drug use, and extreme endurance challenges are unavoidable. His collapse directly influences the establishment of the IOC Medical Commission in 1967 and lays the groundwork for formal anti-doping regulations, a legacy that makes modern sports safer, fairer, and more transparent. Today, when athletes hydrate meticulously, monitor body temperature, and undergo routine drug testing, some of that vigilance traces back to the unfortunate lessons learned from Rome, 1960. In the end, while Knud never gets to enjoy Olympic glory, his story lives on as a reminder of human ambition, the perils of extreme competition, and the thin line between courage and catastrophe. It is a tale that is tragic yet oddly inspiring. A man who chases excellence, pushes through hellish heat, and inadvertently shapes the future of international sports. Next time anyone complains about running in the sun or enduring a long bike ride, remembering Jensen, a guy who pedals his heart out under a Roman inferno, and in doing so leaves a mark that goes far beyond medals, makes that effort seem a little less daunting. Imagine gearing up for the Winter Olympics, feeling like the king of the mountain, ready to launch down icy slopes at breakneck speed, adrenaline pumping, wind in your face, and dreams of gold glittering in your eyes. That was Nicolas Bochatay, the Swiss speed skiing sensation, a guy whose skis practically seemed glued to the snow like they were extensions of his own legs. Everyone knew him as fearless, the kind of skier who made gravity nervous. The 1992 Albertville Winter Olympics were supposed to be his stage, his moment to show the world that Swiss skis could slice through air faster than a caffeinated bullet. But fate, it seems, had other plans, and it decided to crash his warm-up in the most shocking way possible. Picture this: a crisp, clear, alpine morning. Bochatay swooshing down the slope, probably imagining he was already at the finish line, when out of nowhere, a giant snow grooming machine, the monstrous, tank-like contraption responsible for flattening the mountain, lurched into his path. And just like that, in an instant that felt both impossibly fast and unbearably slow, Nicholas collided with it. There was no dramatic last-second dodge, no heroic save. It was instant, brutal, and utterly heartbreaking. A warm-up run turned fatal. A moment meant to prime him for glory instead became a story of tragedy that shook the Olympic world. Now, let's take a second to really picture the scene, because it's almost surreal. These grooming machines are enormous beasts, huge metal treads churning snow into perfection. And here was Bochatay, a human blur of red and white, basically a Swiss rocket on skis. The contrast is absurd. If it weren't so tragic, the sleek precision of an Olympic athlete meeting the raw, industrial force of a snowcat in a freakish instant. It's the kind of accident that makes you think, how on earth does that even happen? But skiing safety, especially back in 1992, wasn't as polished as it is now. Athletes would warm up on open slopes while these machines were still doing their thing. A tiny miscalculation or a moment's distraction enough to turn practice into catastrophe. Bochatay's death was a shocking reminder that no matter how skilled you are, no matter how fast you fly, sometimes sheer chance can write the ending. The skiing world mourned him immediately. Fellow athletes, coaches, and fans were stunned. Whispers of, "How could this happen?" spread like wildfire. He was young, talented, and had the kind of charisma that made you root for him, even if you weren't Swiss or a skiing fan. The Olympics had seen crashes before, sure, but warm-up fatalities? That was a new, terrifying chapter. And yet, amid the sadness, Nicholas Bochatay's story remains oddly emblematic of what makes Olympic sports both thrilling and dangerous. There's a wild, almost reckless courage in athletes like him, a mix of talent, training, and sheer audacity that pushes them to test limits most of us wouldn't even dream of. Bochatay wasn't just skiing for medals. He was skiing because the mountains were calling, because speed was his art, and because life was too short to glide slowly. His accident changed how organizers thought about safety, how they separated machines from humans, and how athletes approached warm-ups. Today, when speed skiers blast down icy tracks, it's partly thanks to lessons learned from tragedies like his. And while the story is sad, there's something inspiring in remembering him not just as a victim of a freak accident, but as a fearless skier who chased velocity with unmatched passion. Nicholas Bochatay's name lives on, etched into Olympic history not only for his untimely death, but for the fearless energy he brought to the slopes, a reminder that the line between glory and disaster can be as thin as a ski's edge, and that sometimes heroes are remembered most for the way they dared to fly. Ignaz Stiefsohn's story sounds like something straight out of an old black-and-white newsreel, where brave men wore leather caps, aircraft looked like fancy kites, and safety rules were mostly optimistic suggestions. It was 1936. Berlin was hosting the Olympic Games, and everything was designed to look grand, powerful, and modern, including a dramatic aerial show featuring glider pilots. Enter Ignaz Stiefsohn, an Austrian glider pilot whose job that day was simple on paper and terrifying in reality. Glide gracefully through the sky and make it look effortless. Gliding back then was not the calm hobby it is today. It was experimental, risky, and heavily reliant on wooden frames, fabric wings, and faith. Stiefsohn took to the air during a demonstration flight meant to impress crowds and officials alike, showing how silent, engine-free flight was the future of aviation. Unfortunately, physics was not in a forgiving mood. Mid-flight, one of the glider's wings failed, snapping away like a bad plot twist nobody asked for. With no engine, no backup systems, and no second chances, the glider lost stability instantly and fell, ending Stiefsohn's life on the spot and turning a show of elegance into a moment of stunned horror. What makes this incident especially haunting is how quietly it sits in Olympic history, overshadowed by medals, records, and propaganda. The 1936 Berlin Games were obsessed with spectacle, and gliding was included as a demonstration sport to show off technological progress and human daring. Stiefsohn was not competing for gold, silver, or bronze, yet he paid the highest price imaginable. His death exposed the uncomfortable truth that early aviation was still very much a work in progress, where engineers learned by pushing limits and pilots trusted machines that sometimes betrayed them mid-air. There was no dramatic rescue attempt, no heroic survival, just a sudden mechanical failure in silence where applause was supposed to be. The crowd did not come to watch a man die, but history does not always ask for consent. For Stiefsohn, the Olympics became his final stage, even though his name would later fade into footnotes and lists rather than headlines. Despite the tragedy, Ignaz Stiefsohn's accident played a small but important role in shaping how aviation demonstrations were viewed. It reminded organizers that entertainment involving aircraft was never just entertainment, and that innovation often came wrapped in real danger. Today, gliders are stronger, safer, and tested to extremes, largely because early pilots like Stiefsohn unknowingly paid tuition with their lives. His story is not about medals or victory ceremonies, but about courage, ambition, and the brutal learning curve of human flight. In a strange way, his silent glide and sudden fall symbolize the era itself, bold, ambitious, and still figuring things out the hard way. Remembering Ignaz Stiefsohn is less about glorifying tragedy and more about acknowledging that behind every polished modern sport or technology lies a trail of risk, sacrifice, and people who never got to land safely. The irony is that gliding was meant to represent peaceful, graceful flight, free from noise and violence, yet it delivered one of the most abrupt and violent moments connected to the games. There were no engines screaming, no explosions, just the cruel snap of structure giving up. In an Olympics remembered for its pageantry, Stiefsohn's final flight quietly reminds us that progress has always demanded bravery, and sometimes it takes everything a person has to give. His name deserves remembrance, not as a statistic but as a human reminder that even beautiful dreams of flight once carried deadly uncertainty and real courage to today. Ross Milne's story sounds like something straight out of a high-speed sports movie that suddenly takes a dark turn, except this one was painfully real, and happened during the 1964 Winter Olympics in Innsbruck, when alpine skiing was still very much in its fearless cowboy era. Ross was a 19-year-old Australian skier, young, talented, and buzzing with that unstoppable energy that comes from being selected for the Olympics at an age when most people are still figuring out life. Australia was not exactly known as a winter sports powerhouse back then, so just getting an Australian skier onto the icy European slopes felt like a big deal. During a downhill training run on the Patrick-Ophel course, Ross launched himself down the mountain at incredible speed, skis humming, wind roaring in his ears, chasing the perfect line like every downhill racer does. But downhill skiing is a brutal game of margins, and on that day, something went terribly wrong. Ross lost control, flew off the course, and slammed into a tree at frightening speed. There were no crash barriers like today, no soft safety nets waiting to catch mistakes, just trees, ice, and gravity doing what they do best. He was badly injured and rushed for medical help, but tragically he died on the way to the hospital, turning what should have been an Olympic dream into a national heartbreak. News of his death sent shockwaves through the Australian team and the wider Olympic community, casting a heavy shadow over the Games before they had even properly begun. His older brother, Malcolm Milne, was also an Olympic skier and would later go on to represent Australia again, carrying both his own ambition and the weight of his brother's memory down the slopes. Ross's death became one of the earliest and most sobering reminders of just how dangerous alpine skiing could be, especially in an era when safety standards were minimal and athletes relied more on courage than protection. Helmets were basic, padding was rare, and course design often placed racers dangerously close to natural obstacles, making every training run a gamble. In the years that followed, incidents like Ross Milne's helped push the sport toward better safety measures, including improved helmets, clearer course marking, and protective fencing, changes that now feel normal but were once unheard of. Today, Ross Milne is remembered not just as a tragic headline, but as a symbol of the raw, high-risk spirit of early Olympic skiing, a teenager who chased speed on a frozen mountain and paid the ultimate price. His story reminds us that behind every Olympic event is real danger, real courage, and real people who risk everything for the thrill of going faster than anyone else. Even decades later, his name still echoes quietly whenever people talk about Olympic tragedies, because it represents a time when passion often ran ahead of preparation, and bravery sometimes crossed into vulnerability. For Australia, Ross Milne's loss was especially painful, marking the country's first Olympic death and forcing officials, athletes, and fans to confront the darker side of elite sport. There were no viral clips, no instant replays, just word of mouth, newspaper headlines, and stunned silence back home. Over time, his legacy became less about the accident itself and more about the lessons it left behind, shaping conversations around athlete safety, responsibility, and the true cost of chasing glory at unimaginable speeds. It stands today as a reminder that progress in sport is often written in sacrifice, memory, and stories that refuse to fade away despite time, technology, applause, medals, and records everywhere.